You're listening to A Radio.
Sources say in an unusual move, the U.S. Embassy delivered an official diplomatic letter to Ottawa, described by one source as a blunt criticism of the Trudeau government's commitment to defence spending.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is the Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. I've taken this title from the actual piece, and it's being covered by actually at least 2 Canadian news outlets. This piece is from Global News, but it's also available on CBC and other places. This bit that I'm going to play to you and I'm going to read to you is a disturbing, in my view, a very disturbing situation. Something that is not at all unexpected when the Liberals get in. Liberal communists, as I call them. Because the first thing they attack, every time, is national defence. The Liberals in particular always think that they have a backstop, and that backstop is the United States, so they don't have to spend so much money on national defence. So they can spend more money, more of our money, on social things, making things fairer, because America will look after our defence. America will protect us. Well, no more, Canada. You got to stand up for your own. You got to pay your way. And that's when the truth comes out. If you're like me and embarrassed when you see these tiny little buzz boxes going up and down the freeway, which are clearly Canadian government military vehicles, that are no bigger than a large Mini, they're an embarrassment. Just as Obama was an embarrassment to the United States, Trudeau is an embarrassment to Canada. Years of Liberal interference in Canadian national defence, demanding bilingualism at every level as more important than national defence, has created a chaotic mess in the Canadian military, where French seems to be more important than the military objective, and Canada's once formidable military force has declined to such a level, which has always been the goal of Liberals in Canada, that it is nothing more than a glorified peacekeeping force. A recent example was the flyover of the Grey Cup, where one jet flew over. Just one. Now, was that symbolic of the size of the military, or was it all that was available? Of course, we won't know. Now, this piece is entitled US Sent Blunt Letter to Canada Criticising Defence Spending. Now, all the links will be on my site, but here's the piece. Canada has been officially called out by the United States over how much it spends on the military. Global News has learned. A blunt letter from the US government was delivered to the Department of National Defence that criticised Canadian defence spending levels and repeated American demands that Canada meet NATO targets. Global News has not seen the letter, said to have a frustrated, critical tone, but multiple sources confirmed it was sent and received. US President Donald Trump has long called for members of the 29-nation military alliance to beef up their budgets for defence. His national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, who spoke Saturday at the Halifax International Security Forum, said getting NATO members to meet the established target of 2% of gross GDP is an urgent priority. There are very serious threats to our freedom and security, and if NATO is going to be effective, and if we want to put our money where our talk is, we got to spend the money to defend ourselves, he said. Nations including Canada at the 2014 NATO summit in Wales were supposed to be moving forward with the spending target within a decade, he noted. We expect our friends and colleagues to live up to their commitments and their promises, he said. He also praised Canada's plan to build and deploy Arctic patrol vessels. The North, he said, is going to be the new front line of defence, as Russia and China have made it clear they are going to militarise the Arctic. One Canadian source told Global News that the US is concerned that Canada does not take the threat from those countries in the Arctic seriously and wants the country to boost its contribution in that area. Now, the piece also said that Canada spends $22 billion a year on defence, but leaders spend little time discussing it. Just 7 countries, including the US and the UK, have met NATO's 2% of GDP spending goal, according to figures released this last June. NATO estimates show Canada is expected to spend 1.27% of its GDP on the military, up from about 1% in 2014. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that was under Stephen Harper, but it was also when Obama was in. Just thought I'd point that out to you. Canada does not fare better when you look at its defence budget in dollars and cents, says Dave Berry, Vice President of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. The country spends the 6th highest amount overall among NATO members on its military. As for meeting the percentage of GDP target, Perry's not optimistic, despite planned increases in defence budgets. Canada is not on a path to live up to commitments that we were signing up for in 2014, he says. But Ottawa intends to dramatically boost military spending in the coming years. In 2017, the government released a plan to increase the budget to almost $33 billion annually within a decade. It's always within a decade, isn't it? It's always into the future. Anyway, the piece continues. Asked about the letter from the US Defense Ministry, Harjit Sajjan, whatever his name is, touted this plan to strengthen spending. Discussions around burden sharing, unquote, with the bloc have been happening for some time, he said. He noted that under the government's plan, the defence budget would see an increase of 70%, a significant amount, unquote. The relationship with Canada and the US, the defence relationship, I think, is even stronger now because they see a tangible plan that we have created, he said, on an episode of The West Bloc that aired recently. Quote, it's working actually extremely well, unquote. The US sending such a letter is an unusual formal means of relaying a message, and it represents an escalation from previous attempts to get Canada to spend more on its military. Canada is increasing its defence spending and its contribution to NATO. That pressure has been increasing in recent weeks ahead of the NATO summit in London, starting December 3. That's right now. In fact, the same message has been conveyed in multiple ways to the federal government, a diplomatic source said, and NATO itself also wants to see more military spending from Canada. In July, however, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg suggested publicly he was happy with the improvements in Canada's defence spending. Under your leadership, he said to the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, quote, Canada has stepped up its contributions to our NATO alliance, including with forces for NATO missions and operations and increasing spending, unquote. But one former defence minister said the letter from the US, NATO's leader in defence spending in relation to its GDP, was not a good sign. Peter MacKay said a letter amounts to a very serious diplomatic slap, not on the wrist, but in the face. During his time in government, the former Nova Scotia Conservative MP said he had talks with defence secretaries regarding Canadian military spending and the country's goal of reaching 2%. Quote, "Those discussions can be forceful and frank, but they took place face to face," said Mackay, who was the defence minister for Stephen Harper for 6 years. So you heard that. I'm just going to play a little piece and then I'm going to make a comment.
Global News has learned that the United States government is ramping up its campaign for the Canadian government to spend more on the military and defense. Sources say in an unusual move, the U.S. Embassy delivered an official diplomatic letter to Ottawa, described by one source as a blunt criticism of the Trudeau government's commitment to defense spending, and calling on Ottawa to meet NATO spending targets. Former Defense Minister Peter Mackay says the letter is a sign of serious frustration.
Diplomatic slap, not on the wrist but in the face. Sending a démarche is really ratcheting it up a notch. You know, the next step is you call the ambassador in and give him a tongue lashing. Multiple sources say the Americans are sick of Canada's lack of military spending, and that frustration has been building in recent months. It's been repeatedly communicated, those sources say, to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government in public and behind the scenes. Of particular concern, Canada's inability to defend the Arctic amid increasing Russian and Chinese presence.
Now, sometimes an actual audio of somebody saying that has more effect than somebody just reading an article. And when you hear a former defence secretary making a comment like that, and to be honest with you, and to be quite frank with you, the Conservatives are just as guilty, because they're not really Conservatives in the sense that you and I understand. They are social Conservatives, which is a very different animal. It's hard to be a true Conservative in a semi-socialist country. But nevertheless, Canada has an obligation which it isn't living up to. And they know it. All governments know it. They're fudging the figures to make it look as though they're spending more than they actually are. You only have to look at the bases in the area that I live in to see what's really going on. And when you have a government that is using military bases for fake refugees who are nothing more than a future political base, to my mind, that is utter hypocrisy. And I say again, why should America pick up the tab for Canadian border protection? Why should the United States pick up the tab for foreign incursion into another country? NATO is all about defending other countries. Yes, everybody knows that, but you've got to carry your own water. It isn't right that one country does all the carrying. Europe is a classic example and has been for 30 or 40 years. I speak from personal experience, coming from the UK. The axe that was put to the British military by the UK Labour Party in the 60s and the 70s was devastating. More devastating, in fact, than what's going on in Canada. But look at the UK naval capabilities of today versus 20 years ago. It's simple and stark. If Britain wanted to do another Falklands today, it couldn't do it because it's cut back so much. They can't even defend their own borders from Russian incursions of planes in their airspace. They have to get up there and buzz them to turn them round. The Russians know that the UK defences are so weak, and they know they can buzz the UK coastline because America won't do anything about it unless something serious happens. Is that the same future for Canada? I hope not. But why should America defend Canada just because it's on its border? If I was America, I would think very hard about building a wall on its northern border to protect its northern flank, because Canada's not doing it. You can't have a population 1/10 the size of the United States not prepared to defend a country bigger than the United States. If Canada needs help, say so. If Canada can't defend its own country, then maybe its country is too big. You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, Spotify, and email. We're on Spotify under the podcast section. Type in Canadian Politics with a twist and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass these links on to your friends. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com/A-Radio, EHRADIO, A-Radio. And please click on the like button. Join us Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 11:45 Eastern, and tell your friends and pass the word. We only tell the truth, not what the mainstream media want you to know.